At this moment in time, Senok appeared before Estfin, holding a bouquet of flowers, filled not only with the colors of nature, but also with the warmth of his feelings. Amidst the peaceful silence, his voice cut the air with an unexpected question, a suggestion that seemed beyond the realm of possibility. He asked Esfin if she would agree to be his life partner, his wife. The question, which sounded like the melody of future promises, was instantly frozen in the air, for fate had already arranged their paths so that they would not be together. The complexity of the moment was deepened by the realization that their bond, their potential future together, contradicted the very nature of the boundaries fate had set for them. Esfin, whose heart was gripped by a mixture of feelings ranging from surprise to the bitterness of realizing reality, gathered her will into a fist and replied in refusal, a rejection that was not easy for either of them, for it carried with it the shattering of hopes for a future together that seemed so tantalizing but impossible. In a world where destinies intertwine like the threads of a great cosmic loom, Senok, a future colossus in the arena of might and skill, expressed a determination that could shake the very foundations of an empire. With a confidence worthy of the greatest heroes in the annals of history, he uttered the words in which there was not a shadow of doubt. He wanted no one but Esfin. This confidence and determination were not just empty words. They were a harbinger of his future path. The path of a devil master swordsman whose name would become a legend in the Empire, a symbol of power to be reckoned with. However, in every story full of passion and ambition, there is room for tragedy. Esfin, whose name was inextricably linked to Senok in these first chapters of their shared epic, had a heartbreaking epiphany. Contemplating Senok, she saw in him not only the future ally of her dreams, but also the source of her greatest despair. Senok's devotion to his path, his unbreakable will to become a devil master swordsman, foreshadowed not only his rise to the heights of power, but also the imminent confrontation between him and Esfin. After all, he would be the one she would, with tears in her eyes and pain in her heart, hate more than anything else in the world. This inner conflict tearing at Esfin's heart led to a difficult decision. Hiding behind a mask of indifference, she decided to walk away, leaving Senok alone in his quest for power. Deep down, Esfin believed that helping a future enemy, even a beloved one, could be a betrayal of her own ideals and values. So she chose the path of escape, the path of finding her own destiny outside the shadow of Senoka's greatness. But history could not so easily let go of these two souls so deeply connected. Suddenly, as if responding to Esfin's inner tearing, Senok, in celebration of his determination and power, created an explosion of mana. This explosion, powerful and blinding, was not only a demonstration of his power, but also a symbol of the rupture between him and Esfin, a separation that left indelible scars on their hearts. Despite Esfin's determination to leave Senok behind and go her own way, fate had it differently. Barely far enough away to feel the chill of freedom, she felt the invisible threads of fate pulling her back again. Finn, unwilling to accept her decision to leave, shortened the distance between them with inhuman speed, proving that his determination and willpower knew no bounds. It was at that moment, when the tension was at its peak, when the air around them seemed to freeze in anticipation of the resolution of their fates, that he appeared, a guy who had suddenly emerged from the shadows of the events that had taken place, as if he had deliberately waited for this very moment to enter their story. With an offer of help that sounded more like a bargain with fate itself, he stood in Esfin's way, offering her his patronage. However, the price of such help was unexpected. He desired nothing less than her heart. These words stunned Esfin, for no one had ever dared to impose such conditions, bringing confusion to her already tumultuous existence. This stranger who had so suddenly burst into their lives was no ordinary passerby. His fate had already predestined him to be one of the greatest magicians of their era, whose deeds would be sung in songs and legends. But at that moment, he was only a secret observer who decided to intervene in their fates, offering his help in exchange for what for many would have been an unacceptable price. Esfin, on the other hand, who became an unexpected time traveler, found herself at the center of a whirlwind of events that not only tested her mettle, but forced her to rethink her views on the world, love, and friendship. With every step she took, whether it was trying to avoid her predestined fate or encountering unexpected allies, her path became more confusing and dangerous. But it is such trials that reveal to a person the unexplored depths of his soul, allowing him to look at the world in a new way and find the strength to overcome any obstacles. In the heart of a powerful empire, where tradition and power are woven into a single pattern, exists the Order of Heavenly Knights. This is not just a military organization, but a symbol of honor, power, and absolute recognition. There is no room for prejudice, status, background, or wealth in this order. The only criteria is personal achievement, talent, and unique abilities. Everyone who crosses the threshold of this legendary organization leaves their past behind and becomes part of the elite, the pride and glory of the empire. The leader and undoubted authority in the ranks of this elite formation is Senok Ivan Black Knight, one of the three greatest dukes of the empire, whose name is known to every inhabitant of this great land. His reputation and accomplishments serve as a shining example to all knights of the order, and it is he who holds strict discipline and high standards within the ranks of the celestial knighthood. Next to the head of the order, as his right hand and indispensable assistant, stands Esfin, the vice commander of the order. This woman embodies the strength, intelligence, and wisdom needed to operate such a powerful war machine. Her duties include not only maintaining order within the ranks of the order, but also strategic planning and maintaining morale among the knights. Her role is critical to the functioning of the order, and together they form an invincible tandem dedicated to the defense and prosperity of the empire. Joining the ranks of the Heavenly Knight Order is the limit of dreams for many young warriors throughout the empire. It not only opens the door to a world where true virtues and abilities are valued, but also provides an opportunity to write your name in the history of a great empire, becoming its defender and hero. At the center of our story is Esfin, a girl, lonely and unrecognized, whose life is burdened by the invisible weight of fates that have seemingly forever determined her place in the world. An orphan whose face is scarred, she epitomizes the sadness and injustice so often faced by those who, for whatever reason, do not fit into the strict framework of societal perception. This scar, instead of being a sign of endurance and strength, has become a curse for her, as it is the reason she is not taken seriously, condemning her to a life of rejection and misunderstanding. Esfin felt a deep sense of dislike for Senok, a figure who in her eyes symbolized all that she could never achieve. Senok was her exact opposite, the embodiment of success and recognition that made her own accomplishments and efforts seem insignificant. In her struggle for a place in the sun, for the right to be heard and seen for who she is, Esfin faced an insurmountable obstacle in the form of societal prejudice and stigma attached to her external features. Her aspirations culminated when, despite all obstacles, she earned a place as host of an important ceremony. This chance could be her proof of her own importance and talent, a chance to show everyone that she was much more than just a girl with a scar on her face. However, at the last moment, when victory seemed almost achieved, bias and fear of honors once again stood in her way. Not only was she denied the recognition she deserved, but she was denied the opportunity to hide what had caused so many of her failures: the scar. The refusal to use the mask, a symbolic act that might have allowed her to at least temporarily forget her distinctiveness, was the final blow that destroyed all hope. So, on the day she was chased out of the study, rejected and alone, Esfin was overcome with a feeling of utter despair and resentment. This moment was not just a personal tragedy, but a vivid demonstration of how deep-seated prejudices can destroy human destinies, robbing them of the opportunity to prove their worth and dignity. In one of the Order's long, brightly lit corridors where the echo of footsteps gave the illusion of a constant escort, Divan Sher turned to Esfin with a sneer, heavy and caustic, like a cold wind that penetrated to the bone. There was obvious mockery in his voice at the recent loss of the anchor seat. There had been rumors about that loss, and Divan noted that Senok was much better. Esfin, who lost all her loved ones in the flames of the fire that broke out. This fire was not a simple accident, but the result of the atrocity of a criminal whose motives are shrouded in mystery and whose identity remains unknown, adding a bitter tinge of unsolved mystery to Esfin's story. However, deep down, amidst the wreckage of loss and through the smoke of happiness gone, Esfin discovered something that became a beacon in the darkness for her, a talent for swordsmanship. This gift, emerging from the ashes of her past life, became both a comfort and a purpose for her. She longed for recognition, for her name to be heard among the best, for her talent to be seen and appreciated. But even here, in this endeavor, disappointment awaited her, embodied in Senok's face. Senok was something of a living ideal, an unattainable pinnacle that Esfin had strived for but never reached. His swordsmanship seemed unrivaled, his technique flawless, and his talent pronounced. It was the thick curtain behind which hid the scene that Esfin had never been able to step onto. Her hatred for Senoku, for his flawlessness, had become a heavy burden for her, a burden she had to carry every day, seeing his successes and comparing them to her own failures. So, in the hallway of the academy, Daivonshir's words sounded like a curse, a reminder of the pain of loss and the insurmountable barrier that stood between Esfin and her dreams. The story, an interweaving of personal dramas and unresolved conflicts, created an atmosphere of intense suspense in which each character was burdened with their own struggles, their aspirations, and their defeats. The atmosphere in the Order was becoming more stifling every day. Before, the Order had been a dream come true for many, a place where talent and perseverance were above all good things. But now that aristocrats were increasingly infiltrating its walls, influence and wealth began to replace true skill and talent. This fickleness of the winds of power and privilege created a disturbing backdrop against which to paint a picture of the future of the Order, filled with the dark colors of decay and corruption. Esfin felt these changes undermining the foundations of the place that had once seemed to her a citadel of justice and honor. The vision that the Order, which was supposed to be the bastion of truth and excellence, was slowly but surely bowing down before the altar of gold and power, evoked in her a feeling of deep disgust and disappointment. These thoughts that the place that had once inspired her feats and pursuit of excellence might be destroyed from within made her heart clench with pain. As she contemplated the future and tried to find a place for herself in this new changing world, Esfin was faced with the urgent need to make a decision. To stay and fight for the ideals she believed in, or to leave these walls, which now seemed alien and hostile to her. But where to? There was no corner of the world outside the Order that could be her new home, no place to escape her disappointment and sadness. In this flood of doubts and worries, Esfin faced the question of the meaning of life, of the purpose for which to continue her journey, and in this search for an answer, she found it in her quest to surpass Senok. That goal seemed to be the only ray of light in the darkness that enveloped her heart. The battle with Senok, the chance to defeat him just once, had become not just a sporting interest but a matter of honor, the meaning of her existence within these walls that seemed about to be swallowed by darkness. At one of the turning points in their shared journey, Esfin shared her decision with Senok with a collected look. If she defeated him in the upcoming duel, she would leave the Order's walls for good. The statement startled Senok, sending him into a whirlwind of unexpected emotions and thoughts. Until that moment, he might not have even considered the depth of their relationship or how his own behavior affected Esfin. His surprise turned to thoughtfulness as he realized that he really didn't know much about Esfin's inner world and the experiences that her heart harbored. As if emphasizing the importance and tension of the moment, the sky above the Order was covered with heavy clouds, and it began to rain. The moisture, the droplets of which were quietly beating on the roofs and sidewalks, added even more drama to the scene. Esfin, sensing perhaps an inner unease or wanting to give Senoku time to think, suggested that the duel be postponed to a more favorable time. However, Senok, not missing the opportunity to make a sparkling joke and perhaps try to hide his excitement, sarcastically suggested that Esfin would blame it on the weather if she was defeated. Esfin, for her part, was not lost and responded in an unexpected way, saying that she was one of those rare natures who found special pleasure and enjoyment in rainy weather. This exchange of remarks further emphasized their mutual misunderstanding and different perceptions of the world, while revealing the unique bond that existed between them despite all the contradictions. Thus, despite the rain and all the attendant circumstances, the decision was made. The duel would take place. It will be a test not only of their skills and abilities, but also a test of their inner beliefs and values, because at stake was not just a victory, but much deeper and more personal issues of their destinies. From the start of the duel, Senok displayed his incomparable speed and marksmanship. His attack was swift and decisive, like a lightning strike tearing through the heavens. Esfin, however, was not inferior to him. With incredible agility and focus, she was able to not only anticipate his movements but also effectively parry his attack, creating a moment for a counterattack. In this confrontation, where every move could mean the end, Esfin focused all her attention on Senok's hands, trying to anticipate his next move. Suddenly, she took a decisive step forward, reducing the distance between them to an absolute minimum. Her blade was at the very back of Senoka's neck, and for a moment it seemed that victory could no longer elude her. At this critical moment, when adrenaline was filling the air and tension was at its peak, fate decided to change the course of events in an unexpected way. Esfin was wounded. Senok's precise and swift strike caused her to lose her balance and fall to the ground, leaving her heart feeling acutely devastated at her lost victory. Senok, taking advantage of the moment, was already standing over Esfin, his voice sounding like a sentence, advising her to surrender. At this moment, against the rainy sky and heavy clouds, Esfin's heart was filled with the bitterness of defeat. The victory that seemed so close seemed to melt right before her eyes, leaving behind only the weight of disappointment and the feeling of a missed chance. But even in this difficult situation, sitting on the ground, she did not lose the dignity and fortitude that had always distinguished her as a warrior. This moment, full of drama and inner feelings, was the culmination of their confrontation, revealing the depth of the characters of both duelists and the inevitability of the trial through which they were to pass. In the depths of her musings, Esfin involuntarily caught a glimpse of how punctual Senok was. It was a quality she had always admired. As time passed, her respect for Senoku only grew stronger, turning into quiet admiration. She admired not only his ability to approach everything with precision and responsibility, but also the way he was able to remain calm and confident in any situation. At the same time, Esfin became aware of her inner inferiority complex, which had come about not without the influence of the negative attitudes of those around her. However, she realized that it wasn't even a little bit of Senok's fault. With each day spent in contemplation, Esfin became more and more convinced that she must seek the moment for decisive action, the moment that would allow her to gain the upper hand and put an end to this eternal struggle, wishing to never touch a weapon again. Her desire to renounce violence and seek peaceful solutions became a kind of beacon to guide her actions. Under the onslaught of the sudden downpour, symbolizing the confusion and turbulent emotions that had been building up in her soul, Esfin felt the irresistible urge to act again. The downpour seemed to wash away her doubts, making her scramble to find a solution that would be acceptable to both her and Senok. This moment was a turning point for Esfin, a moment when she was able to transcend her inner barriers and move forward, towards a bright future where there was no room for fear and hatred. At that critical moment when the tension was at its peak, Senok gathered all his fighting spirit and determination in a single rush. The powerful swing of his sword was so strong that the very ground itself succumbed under the onslaught of force, splintering like a crack spreading across ice. In this act of might lies Senoka's understanding of Esfin's fighting style that she utilizes as well. From his observations, Esfin always focused on the power and accuracy of her strike, swinging aptly as if fate itself had granted her that power. However, despite all his preparation and analysis of his opponent, Senok was suddenly blinded by the setting sun, which seemed to have chosen his side in this confrontation. The sun's rays, playing in Esfin's hair and coloring her silhouette in golden tones, robbed Senok of the ability to see and think clearly for a moment. This critical moment proved decisive as Esfin used the element of surprise to take a powerful swing. When the two warriors' weapons met, their synergy caused a blast wave whose power damaged the surrounding area. This moment of contraction, filled with the energy of the collision, left behind only destruction and Senok on his knees before the relentless power of the Esfin. Kneeling, trying to muster the will to stand up, Senok finally realized Esfin's strategic calculation. She chose this particular time of battle so that the play of light and shadow would be her ally, and the sun would be an unexpected enemy for Senok. In that epiphany lay not only the pain of defeat, but also respect for an opponent who had managed to see and utilize what had gone unnoticed by Senok himself. Lastly, Esfin threw in a sarcastic line about Senok not blaming the weather for his loss. Thus ended the 100th duel between Esfin and Senok, 99 defeats and the first victory. In the heart of the night, with darkness shrouding the streets and only sparse lanterns lighting the way, Esfin shaved alone. She did not seek shelter for her wounded soul, nor did she seek a place where she could heal the fresh wound on her shoulder. There was no wharf for her, for home, that corner of the world where each of us hopes to find peace and solace, promised her neither warmth nor care. So the night accepted her without question or reproach, becoming her only companion in her wanderings through the lifeless streets. The silence of the night was broken only by the rustle of her footsteps, when suddenly, like a glimpse in the darkness, she spotted a small, furry creature. The rabbit, snow-white and innocent, was sitting on the road, its life hanging in the balance. In the same second, a carriage appeared, rushing towards the little creature, and it seemed that nothing would save him from his inevitable death. But Esfin, against all odds, decided to do otherwise. In that moment, her heart was filled with a determination and compassion that outweighed her personal worries and pain. She could not become an idle witness to another's misfortune, even if it involved the fate of a small rabbit. With a lightning-fast reaction, Esfin rushed to the road where the unsuspecting animal sat peacefully. Her act was dictated not so much by reason as by an impulse of the soul. She covered the rabbit with her body, seeking to protect it from the rushing threat. The carriage rushing down the night street was too close, and the coachman, in spite of all his dexterity and skill, was unable to change his trajectory at the last moment. With horror in his eyes, he realized that he had no power to prevent the tragedy. At that fateful moment, Esfin, a girl whose heart was full of compassion and desire to help, sacrificed herself to save an innocent life. She, who became a shield for a defenseless creature, met her fate heroically and selflessly. She didn't know then that she would go back in time and see the man she hated from a whole new perspective. Surrounded by the darkness of night, Esfin slowly came to her senses, lying on the cool ground under the benevolent light of the moon. Her consciousness was shrouded in a fog of bewilderment and questions, for the last thing she remembered was the heroic but insane act of saving an innocent creature on the brink of death. However, instead of the expected eternity in the embrace of darkness, she found herself living away from the city streets in an oasis of tranquility and natural beauty. As she stood up from her sudden awakening, Esfin felt a dryness in her throat, as if she had spent many hours wandering the desert. Searching for a source of water, her gaze fell on a lake whose surface reflected the soft moonlight like a mirror carved out of the night. As she approached its banks, she bent down to quench her thirst, and the moment the water touched her lips, Esfin saw a reflection that made her heart sink. The face before her was not that of a tired warrior, whose features were as familiar to her as her own 5 fingers, but that of a little girl who bore no resemblance to her former appearance. This moment was another twist in Esfin's already surprise-filled life. She stood, staring at her own reflection, trying to understand how and why her own self had been so radically transformed. In this new mysterious reality, where the moonlight played on the waters of the lake and the night air was filled with mystery, Esfin felt lost. But at the same time, a new feeling was stirring in her heart: curiosity. She realized that a new chapter in her life was opening before her, a chapter full of unexplored mysteries and possibilities. The unfamiliarity of her new appearance made Esfin feel uncomfortable, for her warrior body, trained to perfection and accustomed to exertion and struggle, was gone, leaving her helpless and weak. As a symbol of her inner restlessness and uncertainty, she lost her balance and fell to the ground, feeling the cool, damp grass of the forest floor beneath her fingers. In this moment of adversity, a familiar fluffy rabbit suddenly approached her, the same one whose life she had risked everything to save. The creature, radiating joy and gratitude as if dancing in place, bounced merrily around as if trying to share its happiness with Esfin. In the face of such an unexpected turn of events, Esfin, overcome by her initial astonishment, dared to ask the question that seemed the most absurd of her entire life. Who was this rabbit really? The answer sounded clear and distinct in her mind, as if it were the voice of fate itself. The rabbit introduced himself as Rethus, the god of fate, which made the moment even more unreal. It was hard to believe that the cute, defenseless creature in front of her held such a powerful force. But even in the face of a deity, Esther couldn't shake off her doubts. It seemed to her that the furry companion before her was fundamentally different from the rabbit she had rescued from imminent doom. As a response to her disbelief, Rafus, without losing his giddy look, revealed a truth that made Esfin freeze. It was he who had used his divine powers to turn her into a child. This explanation sounded like thunder, becoming the key to unraveling the many mysteries surrounding her sudden transformation and movement into this mysterious forest. Such a sudden revelation opened a new horizon of questions and possibilities for Esfin. She realized that her path, seemingly predestined to struggle and survival, was now intertwined with the actions of a deity so mysterious and powerful. She was not only faced with the task of accepting and understanding her new identity, but also figuring out what trials and adventures fate had in store for her under the guidance of such an unusual patron as Rafus. In a world where the boundaries between life and death proved to be not so insurmountable, something amazing happened. Rafis, a being with incredible powers, became an unexpected savior for Esfin, a girl who came face to face with death itself. He revealed to her the truth about how her sacrifice had not been in vain, and how, through her sacrifice, he had been able to give her a new body, giving her a second chance at life. This news took Esfin by surprise. Accustomed to the idea that life had lost all meaning for her, she suddenly felt an attachment to the past, to the life she had so thoughtlessly given up. Excitement and sadness swept over her, and tears, the symbol of human emotion and the recognition of deeply buried feelings, involuntarily spurted from her eyes. At that moment, Rafis jumped into her arms and with unexpected candor explained to her the fine line of fate on which she found herself. That very night, death had already opened its arms to take Esfin away, but Rethis's favor and attention changed her fate. However, like all magic, salvation had a price. Esfin's new body was linked to Refus's life force, and their fates were now inextricably woven together. Upon learning this, Esfin's heart filled with anxiety, for the prospect of losing her life again was becoming more and more real. Rufus, seeing the worry in her eyes, offered a solution in the form of a treaty. It could be a pledge of their future together, and a promise of the hope of life that Esfin was so afraid of losing again. At that moment, Esfin had the opportunity to not just accept her new destiny, but to actively participate in shaping it, proving that even in the most desperate situations, one can find a ray of light and hope for salvation. In this new dimension, the conversation between Rafus, the embodiment of divine will, and Esfin, who had been given an unexpected chance at a second life, took on an even deeper and more serious character. Rafis, a being whose actions and decisions are shaped by higher cosmic laws, revealed to Esfin the essence of the current state of affairs. Now, her new body had once been under the rule of a different god, adding complexity to an already difficult situation. With a rift in space causing some divine entities to escape, Esfin was faced with a choice: assist Raphius in his search for them, and, as a result, prolong her existence in a new body. It was as if a chess game between the gods had unfolded on the board of fate, and Esfin was one of the key pieces in that game. The revelation that they were in the past, 18 years before Esfin's supposed death, was another shock to her. Time and space seemed to fold into an unusual pattern, giving her a unique opportunity to view the world through eyes that had already seen their own end. Esfin, always striving for maturity of actions and thoughts, asked Raphius a question that may seem naive, but at the same time reflected her desire to take on more adult responsibilities, about the possibility of getting a more mature body. Rafus's response, while predictable, his lack of power for such a transformation, emphasized the limitations of even divine abilities within the world order they had created. With this new understanding of her place in the divine hierarchy and her own role in the events to come, Esfin, along with Rafus, traveled to the nearest village. This path symbolized the beginning of their journey together, during which Esfin would not only have to seek ways to preserve her new life, but also to understand how her own actions could affect the cosmic balance of forces and destinies. Before them opened a world full of mysteries and upcoming trials, where every step could change not only their fates, but also the fate of the entire world. Deep in the woods, where the singing of birds merged with the rustling of leaves, she found a boy who was all alone. He sat at the foot of an ancient tree, his head bowed and his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The tears shimmering on his cheeks like dewdrops on the morning grass betrayed his sadness and despair. Despite her first impression of his appearance, Esfin could not deny that the man in front of her was truly handsome. His face, though riddled with tears, sought solace in this secluded corner of nature. The only thing that confused Esfin was his eyes, red eyes that reminded her of Commander Senok's eyes, whose gaze was always cold and calculating. Reflecting on her encounters with Senok, Esfin couldn't imagine him crying as a child like this boy. In her imagination, Senok had always been unyielding and strong. As he came closer, she asked cautiously, trying to sound soft and friendly, about the reason for his tears. The boy raised his head and stared at her with his frightened yet questioning eyes, asking if she was from the gang. The question caught Esfin off guard. Among the many forest and city legends, she couldn't grasp which faction she was referring to. Her puzzlement only deepened as she stood before this boy whose story was hidden behind the veil of his tears. In this mysterious forest corner, where time seemed to freeze under the weight of unknown stories, Esfin was faced with an unexpected dilemma. In front of her, against the softly rustling leaves, sat a boy whose tears painted rivers of bitterness and loneliness on his face. Esfin, whose heart was filled with sympathy, felt helpless for a moment. Her faithful companion, Rufus, a rabbit invisible to uninitiated eyes, could offer no comfort or help this time, for his magic was unknown to the boy. Esfin realized that she had a task ahead of her that she had to handle on her own, without the help of her mysterious friend. With care and tenderness, as if addressing the most fragile creature, Esfin began to speak. Her words flowed through the air, bringing warmth and reassurance. She was trying to convey to the boy the idea that the forest, though beautiful and mysterious, hid many dangers. The boy, for his part, absorbed every word, and there were flashes of understanding in his eyes, but his next words brought a new twist to the conversation. Confusion and fear were replaced by determination as he began to tell of the gang led by Pantheon, a name that sounded like a challenge to Esfin. Pantheon, the favorite and yet the bane of their shared teacher, was known for his brash antics and cockiness. The boy, as if relieving his soul of the weight of his worries, found in Esfin not just a listener, but a possible ally in confronting the pressure the Pantheon gang was putting on him. In the heart of the dense and mysterious forest, where every rustle seemed to be the sound of distant and unknown danger, the boy shared his painful story. He told of how he, after being brutally abused, was usually left alone among slumbering trees and impenetrable thickets, where light barely penetrated through the dense crown of trees. These moments were a real test for him, for the boy admitted that he had absolutely no skill with a sword, making him an easy target for ridicule and rudeness. Esfin, listening intently, felt as if she had been transported back in time. She remembered her days in the Order, where such scenes of abuse of those who for some reason seemed weaker were not uncommon. Esfin was someone who could not tolerate injustice and cruelty. Courage and determination drove her through life, and more than once she became the protector of those who could not defend themselves. The knights who mocked and taunted the weak found in Esfin not only an opponent, but also punishment for their actions. Each blow dealt to her in defense of the helpless only strengthened the fire of hatred against injustice and cruelty in her heart, making her even more determined to fight for what was right. With words of encouragement and reassurance in her voice, Esfin turned to the boy. She explained to him that giving up was not the answer, that it was important not only to be able to stand up for yourself, but also to fight back against those who thought you were weak. But the boy, embarrassed by this prospect and perhaps lost in the hopelessness of his situation, could not imagine how he could stand up to his abusers. With quiet gratitude, he noted that he appreciated Esfin's advice despite his doubts about his own abilities. A spark of hope could be seen in his eyes, sparked by her words, though hidden behind a curtain of uncertainty and fear of future trials. The moment the atmosphere between Esfin and the boy grew a little warmer, as she decided to find out his name to get even closer to solving his problems. However, a sharp and harsh cry, clearly familiar to the boy, broke the silence of the forest. Momentarily breaking the atmosphere of trust and understanding that had been created, that scream made the boy shrink back in fear. It was clear now. His pursuers had found him. Rufus, a perpetual adventurer and a lover of testing his strength in action, felt a rush of excitement at the thought of the upcoming fight. He could hardly contain the joy of waiting for the confrontation, because every fight was a kind of test for him and an opportunity to prove his superiority. While Rufus prepared for the coming clash, Esfin realized that being in a child's body, she was deprived of her usual physical strength and agility. Accustomed to a certain level of strength and confidence in every movement, she was now faced with having to adapt to new, less powerful physical abilities. But Rufus, still optimistic, assured her that it was only a temporary inconvenience due to not being used to the new look. He was sure that it was all about adaptation, and that soon they would both be able to use their new bodies to the best of their abilities. Meanwhile, Pantheon's gang, known for their cruelty and dislike of the weak, had finally caught up with them. Led by a figure who, without a shadow of a doubt, dominated those present, they said they had received permission from the teacher to beat the boy. This authorization, like an official verdict, gave them the freedom to act as they saw fit, making them confident of their impunity and the right to control the fates of those whom they considered worthy of their attention only as victims for abuse. It was a moment of truth, when everyone present had to choose their role in the upcoming drama, to be a victim, a spectator, or a hero ready to confront injustice. Steadfastly meeting the challenge, Esfin, armed with the branch she had found as a symbol of her determination and intransigence, turned to the pantheon with an impassioned accusation. She exposed his actions as unworthy of a future knight, emphasizing that a true warrior must act with honesty and fairness. Her words were full of determination. She was ready for single combat to end the chain of violence that the pantheon had so willingly used to assert its dominance. Esfin offered to settle the conflict in a fair fight, putting at stake not only her pride but also the safety of the boy whose fate she had now taken to fighting for. To his surprise, Pantheon seemed to hesitant to press on. Esfin used this moment of hesitation with wit and sharpness of tongue, teasing him caustically. From her point of view, his uncertainty and indecision were signs of fear, which only confirmed what she had said about him being unworthy of the title of knight. She wittily called him just another idiot, unable to engage in a fair fight, thus questioning his courage and dignity. These words, mocking words coming from a girl armed only with a branch, deeply hurt Pantheon. His pride did not allow him to accept such a challenge unanswered, and like a wind-tested ancient oak, he snapped out of his seat, determined to prove his superiority once and for all and remove this obstacle to his absolute dominance. Esfin, who had become a symbol of resistance to his tyranny, suddenly gained in his eyes the status of a worthy adversary, in the face of whom he was compelled to prove his strength not by words but by actions. In the forest sagebrush, where light shone through the dense crown of trees, a scene filled with tension and dynamics unfolded. Esfin, with agility and grace, like a dancer amidst the whirlwind of battle, skillfully dodged the deadly sword blade hurtling towards her with menacing speed. She had only a flimsy branch in her hands, unable to find something more suitable for defense in her haste, but she used this primitive weapon with unexpected power. Swinging the weapon she found, she aimed the blow not at the enemy itself, but at the ground beside it, leaving an impressive dent in the ground. The gesture was not so much an attack as a show of strength and confidence. Esfin did not miss the opportunity to make a barbed remark to Pantheon, pointing out to him the need to behave appropriately, emphasizing in her tone that manners were not something to be forgotten even in the midst of battle. Pantheon, a proud and commanding warrior, met Esfin's words with displeasure and insult. He could not allow his credibility to be questioned, especially not by such an unusual and unconventional opponent. In response to the challenge, he ordered his loyal vigilantes, two mighty fighters who were always there, ready to do his bidding, to immediately attack Esfin. But even this seemingly unequal fight could not break her spirit. With incredible agility and skill, she took the fight, and in just a few seconds the situation changed dramatically. She was now standing over the defeated Pantheon, who could not contain her cries of deceit and meanness. This moment was filled with tension. Every muscle in Esfin's body was tense in anticipation of the next action, and the air around her was saturated with adrenaline and anticipation of the denouement. Standing above the Pantheon, she embodied not only physical strength but also moral superiority, demonstrating to all present that true strength lies not in numbers or weaponry, but in skill, and the will to win. With an ease and grace like an autumn leaf that sails calmly in the wind, Esfin tossed aside the flimsy branch, the instrument of her latest victory. This gesture, made with a smile, symbolized not only the end of the battle, but also the ease with which she perceived the events around her. While Pantheon's weary gang, having failed, began to scatter aimlessly through the forest, eager to get out of sight of their victor as soon as possible, Pantheon, despite his defeat, did not lose sight of the future. His words, full of the promise of vengeance, cut through the air like the last ringing echo of a past battle, but Esfin met them with unwavering calm. At this point, she wondered, more with curiosity than concern, about her own newfound body. This body, which had become her abode in less than a day, was already displaying amazing skill and power, handling the sword as if they had been won for a lifetime. This discovery made her think of new limits to her own abilities and powers, which now seemed limitless. Rafus, the one who had watched the battle not as a participant but as a witness, shared his thoughts with Esfin. His words were filled with admiration and pride. He claimed to have provided Esfin with the best possible body, emphasizing her uniqueness and strength. In response to his comment, Esfin turned to the boy, and her gaze was full of concern. She searched his eyes for signs of fatigue or fear, for it was important to her not only to wield her own power but also to protect those who stood beside her. In response to her gaze, Rafus, sensing her concern, did not hold back his enthusiasm and enthusiastically proclaimed her awesomeness, as if trying to reaffirm his belief in her exceptionalism and strength. This exchange between the characters not only emphasized the depth of their understanding and support, but also revealed their characters from new sides, making them even more multifaceted and memorable. Sparks of admiration lit up in the boy's eyes as he watched Esfin boldly and decisively drive away the Pantheon, the personification of might and power that not everyone dared to even challenge. At that moment, time seemed to stop, and the boy, absorbed in the scene before him, forgot for a moment everything in the world. But suddenly, an unexpected sound broke the silence. Esfin's stomach rumbled, reminding her of earthly needs even at times like this. With the ease of childlike directness, the boy hastened to promise that he would feed her, as if in his little hands was the power to satisfy the hunger of anyone who happened to be near. When telling about himself, the boy mentioned that he was temporarily living in one of the villages, shrouding his words in mystery and not going into unnecessary details. His story was sparse on details, but that only added to the image of mystery. When he learned that Esfin was homeless and had nowhere to spend the night, he did not hesitate to offer her shelter in his home. This gesture of generosity and openness of heart was so inspiring that Esfin, used to wandering and uncertainty, felt grounded for a moment, finding something like home. When they arrived at the small but cozy house, which seemed an island of warmth and comfort amid the vast expanse, they were met by a maid. The meeting was brief, but there was a sense of hospitality and willingness to welcome the weary travelers. At that moment, Esfin realized that the boy, despite his generosity and kindness, probably faced misunderstanding and perhaps even bullying from others because of his status or position in society. The thought made her look at the boy from a different angle, to see him not only as a young companion, but also as the brave heart behind the seeming fragility. The food offered at the lodge was simple and unassuming. The aromas and tastes seemed familiar and cozy, reminiscent of home and the simple pleasures of life. To Esfin, accustomed to the strictness and discipline of the order, where every meal was just another task on the road to perfection, this dinner seemed like something from another world. In the back of her mind, she felt a warm wave of gratitude for this simple but sincere gesture of hospitality. Thinking aloud, Esfin made no secret of her anxiety about the consequences of her intervention. She feared that Pantheon, whose dignity had been hurt, would only become more vindictive, and it would not only affect herself, but increase the bullying of the boy. Her words hovered in the air, filling the space with the weight of foreboding and uncertainty of the future. But the boy, whose nerves were strained by the realization of the possible consequences, boldly expressed his gratitude for Esfin's act. His words sounded sincere and from the heart. He was genuinely glad that at last there was someone who stood up for him, who showed willingness to defy circumstances and defend his honor. This moment was a ray of light for him in the dark realm of his current existence. With the talk of swords and the art of combat, the boy admitted with some sadness his clumsiness and inability to master the skill of the swordsman, leading even his own father to deem it best to send him to this village, away from home and family obligations. The boy's words were full of hidden pain and disappointment in himself, and yet they expressed a quiet hope for the understanding and support he had been seeking for so long. After a long and tense conversation in which questions and misunderstandings were intertwined, Esfin finally gathered her will and decided to find out the name of her mysterious interlocutor. Her interest in this young man was growing by the minute, and the mystery of his personality only added fuel to the fire of her curiosity. When she once again asked him his name, the boy, a little embarrassed and hesitant but still with a certain amount of pride in his voice, replied that his name was Senok Black Knight. The name made Esfin freeze for a moment as it sounded unusually familiar to her, as if it had been cut from the pages of her own life, but she couldn't immediately recall exactly where it was familiar from. All her thoughts began to rapidly form into one picture, and her heart began to beat at an accelerated rhythm. With overwhelming excitement and bewilderment, she suddenly realized that standing before her was none other than a younger version of her current commander-in-chief, a man she had encountered in a variety of circumstances, and who had always evoked in her a sense of unbreakable fortitude and determination. Disbelief gripped Esfin, and she couldn't bear the thought that this young man who stood before her now, in his 18, was far from the image of the fearless warrior he was in her time. She hastily asked him about his brothers, thinking she might have mistaken the man, but Senok, maintaining his uncertainty, admitted to having only a sister. It finally convinced Esfin that time had the power to change a person beyond recognition. Recognizing that in the past, Senok was far from the ideal of a brave warrior who was not only unskilled with a sword, but also prone to fear in the face of danger, made Esfin rethink many things about the nature of bravery and fortitude. She stood before a startling revelation, comprehending the story of a man showered with fame and envy by those around him. This man, Senok, had started his journey from nothing, creating his own destiny literally out of nothing, which seemed incredible and almost mythical to her. Her curiosity led her to ask about her progress in learning the art of swordsmanship, to which Senok admitted with some awkwardness and embarrassment that things weren't going too well. His confession of his fear of swords, instruments of war and defense, was a revelation to her, challenging his manly image. Throughout the evening, Esfin mulled over what she had heard, trying to discern if there was sincerity behind Senok's words. It was hard for her to accept the idea that this man, a symbol of strength and inspiration to many, could have such fears and doubts. This evening filled her with reflections on the limits of what is possible and how greatness often begins with overcoming internal barriers. Later, alone in the room she had been given, Esfin continued to struggle with the idea that this new world, so different from her reality, could have been something more than just a fantasy or a dream. She longed to return to her familiar life, to her true self, but doubts about whether it was even possible tormented her, keeping her on her toes. Thinking about the body she found herself in and her true self left somewhere else in another dimension or time made her heart fill with anxiety and hope at the same time. This night promised to be long and full of reflections on fate, choice, and how sometimes you have to get lost in time and space to find yourself. Finding herself in the uncharted expanse of this new mysterious world, Esfin felt an overwhelming sense of longing and nostalgia for her past self. It was a feeling deeply rooted in the very core of her being, like thin roots snaking through the dense fabric of reality in search of truth. An inner voice told her that somewhere in the vast expanse of this world there must exist her former body, the embodiment of her former life that she so desperately wanted to find. However, Rethus, the embodiment of wisdom and mystery, who stood beside Esfin like a shadowy guardian, shared a troubling warning with her. His words, tinged with seriousness and urgency, sounded like a cold shower seeking to quench the blazing fire of her aspirations. He urged Esfin to give up her search for her past self, citing the mystical bond that united their souls. Rafus clarified that he and Esfin had one soul for two, making their fates inextricably linked. According to him, Esfin's encounter with her former body could have had catastrophic consequences, the self-destruction of her current self, as if allowing the light of one star to absorb the radiance of another, robbing her of all existence. Despite the severity of this warning, Rafus didn't leave Esfin without hope and a light at the end of the tunnel. With the generosity of a true companion and mentor, he offered her a bargain, a spark of hope that could light a path through the darkness of despair. He promised that he would grant her any wish, no matter how great, if Esfin could accomplish the unimaginable, to find and bring back all the escaped divine entities who, like lost stars, had slipped from their cosmic captivity. This offer put a new purpose in Esfin's heart, a prospect for action that promised not only challenge and adventure, but the possibility of achieving something great, perhaps even regaining what she had lost without risking her current existence. Immersed in deep thoughts about the possibility of returning to her past, Esfin felt the tantalizing attraction of times when her existence was not marred by resentment or rejection. The thought was brewing in her heart that the transition to this new world had not only opened a gateway to uncharted challenges, but also provided her with unprecedented opportunities. She realized that now, freed from the shackles of past prejudices and limitations, she had every chance to reach her full potential, to become a person whose influence and importance would be recognized in every corner of this world. With newfound hope and a thirst for knowledge, Esfin turned to Raphaeus with a question that had been simmering in her mind for a long time, but which she dared not ask. She wanted to learn more about those mysterious divine entities whose search could lead her to the fulfillment of her most cherished wish. The light of curiosity and hope flickered in her eyes, for understanding the essence of these mystical forces could be the key to unlocking her own destiny. Rafus, meeting her gaze, could not hide the smile that dawned on his face. His reaction was due not only to Esfin's sudden interest in divine entities, but also to the realization of how far she had come on her journey, from feeling lost and isolated to wanting to actively participate and make her mark on the world. His smile was filled with warmth and approval, for each of Esfin's questions brought her closer to understanding her role in this new reality, and his job as her mentor and companion was to guide her along the way, sharing the wisdom and knowledge that would help her fulfill her destiny. In one of the mysterious corners of the universe, where the fabric of reality warps under the weight of unfathomable secrets, Rafus, a guardian from another dimension with knowledge beyond the reach of ordinary mortals, shared some surprising information. He spoke of the existence of divine creatures, each embodying powers capable of reshaping the very essence of reality. These beings, taking the form of animals, are endowed with power by which a single man can take control of entire villages, mighty cities, majestic countries, and sometimes dimensions stretching across vast distances. The most powerful and dangerous of these entities have been isolated in a special world where every rustle and every movement is under the watchful eye of Refuse. But even in this remote reality, where their power should have been limitless, it proved to be shackled by unknown fetters that significantly limited their power and influence. It was for this reason that, despite his nobility and power, Rafus confessed his own helplessness in the face of some of the challenges he faced in this difficult business of managing and controlling the divine forces. This vulnerability led him to seek the support of Esfin, a mysterious ally whose name is barely known outside of their own conversations. It was clear to Refuse that without outside help, without an ally with unique abilities and knowledge to supplement and enhance his own efforts, he would not be able to accomplish his goal. Collaboration with Esfin seemed the only way out of the situation, a bridge across the abyss of the impossible that would allow them together to meet the global challenges facing them in this mysterious and dangerous world of divine beings. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight were barely beginning to make their way through the dense morning mist, Esfin found herself talking to Senok. This conversation, filled with personal revelations and family secrets, opened her up to new facets of a history that seemed so distant and disconnected from her own world. Senok shared with her the story of the manor in which he was now finding refuge. This place, surrounded by peace and quiet, turned out to be the property of Countess Iseth, a woman whose name was inseparably connected with his family, for she was his father's bride. Senok did not conceal the fact that his father, being a man of weak character, could not resist the pressure of circumstances, which eventually led to Senok being forced to leave the social circle and life he was accustomed to and settle down on the Countess's estate. This change in his life seemed extremely significant, but also mysterious, for it raised questions in Esfin as to how Senoku had subsequently managed not only to return to his former life, but also to retain the title of Duke, which was apparently not only his birthright, but also his spirit. This conversation got Esfin thinking about a lot of things, including not only the fates of individual people, but also how complex circumstances can affect a person's life path, leading them to downs and ups. She reflected on the trials and difficulties Senoku had to overcome on his journey to retain his title, the decisions he had to make, and the battles, both internal and external, he had to win in order to regain his rightful place in society and preserve his dignity and legacy. Inspired by the morning's conversation, which had laid bare to Esfin the depth of her worries and destiny, Senok suddenly suggested a trip to the training camp. The offer seemed a challenge to himself, a test he decided to take, perhaps seeking to prove not only to Esfin but also to himself his strength and determination. When they arrived, they immediately sensed the tense atmosphere. The gazes filled with distrust and obvious hostility were directed toward them. Esfin, sensitive to changes in the environment, quickly sensed that the negativity was aimed not only at her but also at Senok, whose presence here apparently antagonized the locals as much as it once had. She remembered Senok's words about the difficulties he had to overcome and realized that for him, every step in this camp was a test, a challenge to fears and memories of the past. Having encountered Pantheon and his gang, whose intentions clearly did not bode well, Esfin decided to act. Her gaze, full of determination and unwavering strength, literally made the assertive young men retreat. Their reaction to such an unexpected comeuppance was immediate. They chose to leave the scene of the confrontation, leaving Esfin and Senok in relative peace. In that moment, Esthini realized that for Senok, this visit to the camp was something of a personal challenge, a way to test himself and his ability to stand in the face of past demons. However, seeing his internal struggle and realizing that being here was bringing him more pain than discovery, Esfin suggested he leave for a quieter and more peaceful place. A place where they could find solitude and peace, away from the judgmental stares and heavy atmosphere of the training camp, to find an opportunity for a frank conversation and perhaps an understanding of how to proceed and what to do in their current situation. One quiet evening, as the golden rays of the sunset filtered through the window panes, creating a cozy atmosphere in the room, Esfin cautiously approached Senoku. Her eyes were full of indecision, and a shadow of embarrassment played across her face. She looked at Senoka for a moment, as if trying to find support in him, before she broke the silence with her request. Esfin, with a noticeable hesitation in her voice, asked for permission to stay with Senok for a while longer. Her words were quiet, but they were sincere. She reflected that under the current circumstances, Senok was the only person she knew, and the very thought of him being her future commander-in-chief only added to her embarrassment. Senok, for his part, found himself taken by surprise by such an offer. His reaction was one of embarrassment, but in the back of his mind he felt he could not refuse Esfin. With some uncertainty, but with a sincere desire to help, he agreed. After a brief pause, Esfin, a little more fortified by her agreement, decided to reintroduce herself, but this time using only her short name, Finn. The gesture seemed to symbolize a new beginning and an attempt to find common ground. Then, with a determination that surprised Senok, Finn declared that in gratitude for his hospitality and trust, she would help him deal with the bullying he faced. This statement sounded to Senok like a promise of new change, for the problems he faced had long needed a solution. When the silence between them broke again, Senok, his voice trembling with a vulnerability never before seen, turned to Esfin with a question that had been hovering in the air. He wanted to understand exactly how she was going to assist him in his difficult battle against bullying. In response, Esfin looked at him with warmth and confidence, as if her gaze could banish all shadows of doubt from his soul. She said that he had every right to ask her for anything, for she was determined to help him in any way she could. Esfin urged Senok to trust her, promising that her support would be unconditional. Esfin's words broke through the dam of emotion behind which Senok was hiding. Tears, symbolizing years of loneliness and hardship, suddenly flowed down his cheeks. This moment was a catharsis for him, as he had never experienced real support and help from anyone before. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was not alone in his troubles. Esfin watched him and remembered her first impressions of Senok. She had once thought of him as cold, cruel, and heartless, but now, seeing his tears and vulnerability, she realized how wrong she had been. Her mind flashed back to that very moment during one of her training sessions when Senok had praised her and told her that she could go to him for any help she needed. That moment, when he showed his care and willingness to be supportive, forever cemented itself in her heart and shattered all her preconceived notions about him. In that moment, Esfin realized that true strength lay not in cruelty and coldness, but in the ability to remain human, capable of empathy and support even when the world itself seemed to be against you. In one of those moments when silence speaks more than words, Esfin gently touched Senok's soul, asking him to keep the tears from escaping from his eye sockets. It wasn't just a request, it was a quiet act of sympathy, an intertwining of souls as one tries to comfort the other despite the depth of their pain. But then, in that gesture of comfort, Esfin did something that made her feel a surge of embarrassment. Her hand, as if guided by the invisible threads of fate, gently rubbed Senok's head. It was an involuntary movement, an expression of deep care and affection, but she felt a blush of embarrassment flood her cheeks. The thought of studying at the training center suddenly took over her mind. It wasn't just a matter of future or career, it was a test of herself, of her limits. While Esfin weighed the pros and cons, trying to penetrate the fog of doubt and uncertainty, Senok seemed to sink into an even deeper sea of confusion. His reaction was a quiet echo of his inner feelings, which were a mixture of fear and admiration for Esfin's courage. Esfin, for her part, was fascinated by the mystery hidden in the depths of Senok's soul. Her interest in his fear of swords was no mere curiosity. She saw in that fear a chained dragon that, if freed, could gain wings. Esfin hoped that she could be the key to his release, help him overcome his inner demons, and perhaps together they could turn over a new leaf where the fear of swords would be but a distant memory. She believed she could breathe new strength into him, strength that would allow him to face his fears and overcome them. In the maze of questions and musings, Esfin approached Senoku with a piercing question that touched on the very essence of his participation in training. Her gaze, full of sincere interest, searched for an answer not only in his words, but also in his eyes, those mirrors of the soul, where real feelings and intentions are hidden. Senok, whose heart was burdened by the weight of other people's expectations, confessed that his path to the sword was not his heart's choice, but his father's order. This confession had put a heavy burden of unfreedom between them, affecting Esfin sincerely. She remembered the longing for a sense of belonging, for the warmth of closeness and understanding. She remembered the longing for a sense of belonging, the warmth that comes from closeness and understanding. The offer to walk through the village was an outstretched helping hand, a ray of light in the darkness of loneliness. Esfin thought that among the streets and squares of their small world, Senok would find souls willing to share warmth and care, those who would see him not only as his father's son, but as himself. There was a contradiction in her heart. On the one hand, Esfin felt the need for distance, for the game of fate could easily turn them from allies of time into sworn enemies of future days. On the other hand, she could not remain indifferent to his distress. Her desire to help, against all odds, was an expression of gratitude for the shelter he had provided, for a roof over his head in a world where every corner could conceal a threat. Thus, Esfin's own feelings and reason, the desire to help and the realization that sometimes helping could have unpredictable consequences, struggled in her heart. Suddenly, without any warning, Rafus let out a loud shriek so unexpected it could have brought the entire forest to its feet. Emotion swept over him like a wave, awakening an instinct that demanded immediate action. His shout was full of confidence that a situation beyond the ordinary was unfolding before them, a situation so serious that it would require all of them to be as focused and ready for action as possible. Rafus felt the presence of not just someone unusual, but a divine creature. His intuition told him that this was going to be an important meeting. Prompted by an inner urge, he couldn't resist and headed to where his senses promised an opening. Esfin, stunned and intrigued by what was happening, turned to Senoku with a question, trying to figure out what could have attracted their comrade with such force. Her gaze, full of questions and curiosity, met with an answer that dispelled all doubt. Senok's words were like a key that opened the door to understanding. There was a village in the direction Rafus was headed, and not just any village, but the place where the first deity dwelt. This discovery created a wave of admiration and at the same time trepidation for the upcoming encounter. The friends realized that their journey was taking a new and completely unexpected turn, promising an encounter with a being whose presence in these lands could mean anything, but surely something great. Esfin, sensing the excitement and anxiety of the impending separation, approached Senoku to ask if they could go together. In response, Senok shared that he is tasked with meeting with his mentor, a visit that can't wait. Not wanting to leave Senok alone at the moment of such an important and possibly risky adventure, she offered to accompany him so that the support of a friend could ease the excitement of the meeting. However, Senok explained that his teacher, whose name was widely known and respected, did not welcome the appearance of strangers during their meetings, making her suggestion unfeasible. Nevertheless, Senok, feeling a deep connection to Esfin and eager to be there for her at any moment, promised to ask his teacher for a temporary release from his student obligations. His offer was dictated not only by a desire to support Esfin, but also by the realization that the trials ahead might require their mutual support and the strength of their friendship. However, Esfin's reaction to his suggestion was not at all what Senok had expected. Instead of gratitude or relief, she stiffened, seized with horror at the thought that a man willing to make such considerable sacrifices for a comrade should be her future commander-in-chief. This moment of insight for Esfin was a testament to Senoka's deep personal qualities, which caused her not only admiration, but also anxiety for a future in which such decisions could have unpredictable consequences. Senok, catching Esfin's silent reaction and her sudden fright, began to question his decision. His heart was filled with anxiety, for his intentions, though sincere, had led to an unexpected and unwanted reaction. At this point, both are faced with the depth of their feelings and the upcoming trials that could change not only their relationship, but the entire course of their destinies. After the tension between Esfin and Senok reached its peak, Senok, always sensitive to the feelings of others, couldn't help but wonder if he was unwittingly becoming a burden to Esfin. His words were full of genuine concern and a desire not to cause trouble. Esfin, in turn, trying to dispel his doubts and add reassurance, responded with comfort, running her hand affectionately over his head in a gesture of support and friendship. She hurried to the village afterward, promising Sonoku that they would meet for dinner, leaving him to ponder the events to come. Meanwhile, as soon as Esfin disappeared from sight, the Pantheon, who had been surreptitiously monitoring their interactions until then, felt it was the right time to put their devious plans into action. His presence and intentions went unnoticed by the protagonists, but his determination to act foreshadowed new challenges in their path. At this time, Esfin, filled with determination to find the deity on Refus's tip, began her search of the village. Despite her enthusiasm and desire to help, the task was much more difficult than she had anticipated. Without concrete knowledge of what the deities looked like or how they could be located, each step seemed more and more difficult for her. Esfin realized that in her journey to discover a divine being, she would have to face not only the mysteries of the world, but also her own limitations, learning to overcome which would be one of her greatest challenges along the way. Rafus, whose intuition and sensitivity to unusual phenomena had always set him apart from the rest, shared the observation that places where deities appeared were shrouded in a special aura. He described the sensation as something magical that people instinctively perceive as a miracle. His words were filled with confidence and a secret knowledge that seemed to lift the veil of the unknown world. And as if nature itself had decided to confirm his words, out of the clear sky, against all the laws of the weather of that area and season slowly swaying in the air, a snowflake descended directly into the palms of Esfin's hands. This moment seemed to stop time all around, emphasizing how the unbelievable and unexplainable invades everyday reality. What to Esfin seemed a clear sign and a miracle, the villagers accepted with surprising calmness and even indifference. Snow in the warm season, which should have caused surprise if not shock, did not seem to bother them. This could indicate that they had experienced such phenomena many times before, or their faith and understanding of the world allowed them to accept such events as a natural part of their lives.